a general's inside account of the Iraq-Afghan wars. General Bolger, thanks for Skyping in this morning from the city where I attended school, Raleigh, North Carolina, proud home of NC State. General, let's talk about what John McCain had to say. Are you concerned that our continued involvement in the Mideast and in Iraq in particular is starting to mirror Vietnam?
Well, JD, thanks for talking with me today. And yes, I am quite concerned. I think we've already tried it in Iraq from 2003 to 2011, sending in a bunch of American troops, trying to go house to house in these villages and towns, sort out which guy's a farmer, which guy's an insurgent. I mean, as Senator McCain well knows from his own combat experience in Vietnam, to include honorable service as a prisoner of war, that's a losing recipe. We've tried it in Iraq. We've tried it in Afghanistan. The right way to use U.S. military force is to go in an overwhelming manner and do a rapid, decisive operation. That is what our military is designed to do. We did that in both Afghanistan and Iraq, Afghanistan in 01, Iraq in 03, and then we stayed around instead of just turning it over to the locals and letting them sort their business out.
So the notion is, when you look back at Afghanistan and Iraq, the notion is go in, get the job done, and then the exit strategy should be to exit forthwith. No nation building. What about any continued presence of U.S. troops on the ground?
I think a continued presence makes some sense, but trying to dictate how their government is formed or what they do does not work. And we saw that in Vietnam, we saw it in Iraq, we saw it in Afghanistan. These countries don't understand Democratic Republic, not because they're evil people. The average person in those countries is just trying to raise their family and do their work at their farm or in their shop. But it's very, very difficult to expect these people to suddenly make a jump from a very authoritarian structure, in many cases, not a lot of education. Heck, the illiteracy rate in Afghanistan among adults is 85% cannot read and write. It's asking a lot of those folks to suddenly make the jump to Jeffersonian democracy. So they're going to have to pick something that works for them, and it may not be something that we like, but then maybe leave a small presence of advisors and assisters with enough security to keep ourselves safe, and do what we can to help them. And that is a winning formula. That is what we did in the Korean War. We didn't dictate the government of South Korea, but we did provide them guaranteed support over the years, and I think they've done pretty well with it.
And General, a minute remains in this segment, though I think we'll be continuing after the break. Let me just ask you, are you concerned with the president sending advisors or a small presence of 1,000 to 3,500 troops in Iraq that we're about to repeat some mistakes? 30 seconds to answer.
No, I don't think we're repeating the mistakes, as long as he keeps it limited to an advise and assist role with some air power.
Fair enough. General Daniel Bolger, we want to talk with you more about what should be done with our military based on your personal experience. When we come back, we'll talk more about the lessons you learned firsthand in both Iraq and Afghanistan. General Daniel Bolger, our guest, the author of the new book, Why We Lost, a general's inside account of the Iraq-Afghan wars. Interested in your take on this, too. You heard what the general had to say. What do you think of it? Why don't you tweet me at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum, and we'll continue the conversation with retired Army Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger after this. Let's continue our conversation with retired Army Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger, the author of the book, Why We Lost, a general's inside account of the Iraq and Afghan wars. General Bolger, you were on the ground there. You saw firsthand what was going on. Is there one anecdote, one experience you had in either Iraq or Afghanistan that typifies the futility and you say the defeat that came in our involvement there?
Yeah, I think what I would think about, JD, is the inability of both countries to sort out their government. You realize that in both Iraq and Afghanistan, the guys who ended up being the leaders for a long time, Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, Nouri al-Maliki in Iraq, both lost their elections. In the case of Maliki, he lost the 2010 election. We let him maneuver his way back into power, and he had no goodwill for us. In fact, I believe he had a little too much influence from the Iranians, who were his old benefactors. Hamid Karzai in 2009 basically stuffed the ballot box and beat another guy, Abdullah, who just ran in the recent election. In both cases, we knew that those guys were not legitimately elected. We knew those countries had trouble with democracy. I mean, you're a former congressman. You know that elections must be seen as fair and truthful, or the people lose faith in their government. Those were our partners. And when you got partners like that, you're hooked to a donkey. You're not going very far.
General, as you mentioned, the corruption on the part of those leaders in Afghanistan and Iraq, respectively. I can recall, because I was serving in Congress, when free elections were held for the first time, and people were going out, despite the presence of those who were trying to disrupt the process, attack the ballot boxes, deal with all of that, yet we saw people flocking to vote. And our perception on this side of the ocean was, here are noble people who want to be involved in self-government. Did we have it wrong back here at home?
No, I think you had it exactly right. You all correctly saw, as I saw on the ground in both countries, the average person in those countries wants their own say, just like they do in the United States or Great Britain or Japan or anywhere else. They want to determine their own future for them and their family. The problem is, what they were electing were a bunch of crooks in many cases who wanted to go back to the old system. Saddam was gone and the Taliban were gone, but the idea that the guys in the Capitol would take care of themselves and their buddies, that wasn't gone.
Well, General, let's talk more about just how this played out. Earlier in our conversation, it seemed to me you were almost quoting the Eisenhower doctrine. Overwhelming force applied overwhelmingly and achieving objectives. Now, we put in place overwhelming force, but there seemed to be an incrementalism. I think back especially about Iraq and the delay in Fallujah. I guess the argument comes under economy of force. In retrospect, would it have been more merciful and more effective to absolutely commit to virtually total conventional warfare and a massive air campaign in Fallujah, rather than waiting and allowing the enemy to solidify its ranks there?
Absolutely, JD. I mean, you just quoted a guy who was a great president, General Dwight Eisenhower, but he was also a five-star general who led the Normandy invasion. He knew what he was talking about. I mean, you don't mess around with military force. You're going to commit the great men and women of our military representing the American people. You go in there hard and you finish these guys off, and you don't screw around. If you do anything else, like you said, it's not merciful to them either. Halfway measures result in halfway results.
About a minute left, General. How do you reconcile the notion of flexible response, a light footprint, special forces against these extra-national, these different factions such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda? With about 40 seconds, is there a place for a light footprint and flexibility?
Absolutely. And the Eisenhower administration were the guys who pioneered that with the efforts they took in places like Guatemala and in places like Lebanon and Iran. That's exactly right. Because to the enemy, who's just a few terrorists working in a cell, the arrival of that SEAL team or CIA team is their worst nightmare. It's the equivalent of getting hit in the face with a sledgehammer.
Well, Army Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger, we do appreciate very much your insights. Again, the name of your new book, Why We Lost, a General's Inside Account of the Iraq and Afghanistan Wars. General Bolger, again, we thank you for Skyping in this morning from North Carolina's capital city of Raleigh. And I got to say, from my vantage point, go Wolfpack, since Raleigh is also the home of NC State. Go Pack. Thanks, General Bolger. America's Forum will continue here on Newsmax TV following this timeout.